Hello, everyone. Chris Green, the History Chap. It's Friday the 1st of March, and this is the History Chap Live. Trying to make this a regular thing. So, hello to all of you. And I notice there's loads of you already in chatting away. First question. Okay. I'm using a microphone today, a built in mic. So, can you hear me? Could we just get a yes or a no? Can you hear me? I sound a lot better, and a yes from Darren. Well, thank you very much indeed. That's great. That's great that you're hearing me. That's cool stuff. So, welcome to everyone. And I notice we've got loads of chat already going on. So, hello, Dalton. Hello, Darren. Hello, Darren Gilmore. We've got Sarah Jane. Lovely to see you again, Sarah Jane. I'm sure I saw Jen Ingle here. QA Library, as ever, great to see you here. Let's just see who else we've got. Chris Warren. Oh, you like listening to me, Chris? Thank you very much, mate. David Webb. David Webb, you had a question. You recently watched the Civil War, directed by Ken Burns, narrated by David McCullough. Have I got any plans to do a vlog about that? Are you talking about the program or the Civil War? And just to be clear, are we talking American Civil War, English Civil War? If you could just put that in, then I'll give you a better steer. Okay, Chris, nice to think, or Christopher, sorry. Anyway, good to see you all. John, you're here. Hello. Someone's coming in. That's Dalton's in Toronto. Obviously, where else we got? I'm sure. Did I see someone? Leslie, you're from South Carolina. Lovely to see you as well. By the way, folks, stick in, apart from hello, if you haven't already, stick in where you're coming from in the world. I love to find that out. I said recently that I'm amazed just how many countries or people from many countries come in and watch me on YouTube. It's a bit bonkers, really. Obviously, the biggest contingent, not quite half, are from the UK. A big contingent from the US. There's a good sort of 25% of my viewers come from the USA. About 10% Australians. About 5% Canadians, about 2% we have then sort of New Zealand, another 2% South Africans, another 2% Republic of Ireland, and then we're sort of into the 1.5%. Recently had a whole lot from Ghana. They've been watching the Ashanti War video, and it seems to have gone berserk in Ghana. And getting some really interesting comments from people in Ghana as well. That's really cool. So anyway, where have we got? Oh, so now I've let the hair out now, haven't I? We've got Terry in Cincinnati. I've got Oklahoma City, Hull. Good to have Hull here. Greetings from the Pennines. Hello, Martin Buckley. Goose Tree in Cheshire. And of course, Tony, I used to live up in Cheshire till just over a year ago. Burns committed over 250 glaring errors in the Civil War. I'm thinking you're talking the Civil War, the American, the big American program, Leslie. Not sure. Hello from Dublin. Hello there, Dara. We've got Kerrville in Texas. Goodness knows what time it is over there, but thank you very much indeed for joining us. We've got Cincinnati. Blimey, it's like a North America fest today. This is fantastic. Hey, and we've got Jan from Frankfurt Airport. Lovely to see you as well. Frankfurt Airport departures. Do I have I've got a question here while we're getting it. A video about genealogy would be interesting. That's cool. And Harvard 123. Hi, Chris. I've got a question for you. Do you have a reading list concerning British politics, economics, 1800 to 1950? I'm in London, by the way. I don't really have a reading list, and that was actually something I was going to raise with you guys today. Would you like a little bit more political, not necessarily political intrigues, but some of the characters and that played around in Victorian 19th century Britain and early 20th century? Winston Churchill's sort of done to death. Very interesting character, and obviously had a role to play, very much a role to play in British history. But there are some other fascinating folk as well, not least William Gladstone would be one, Robert Peel is another. And yeah, anyway, so unfortunately can't help you on that one specifically. Okay. We've got North Yorkshire, Sydney, Australia. Lovely to have the Aussies with us, and a kangaroo emoji as well. So thank you very much indeed. John, only two kinds of people know where Hull is: the people who live here and the Luftwaffe. Ouch. So, very nearly went to Hull. It was my second choice university, but I got my first choice back in the 80s of Birmingham. So didn't go to Hull. And but I did go there. In fact, it's the only time I have been to Hull. So there you go. I think you rest your case, John. By the way, folks, if my eyes keep dropping down, it's only because the chat's down here, the camera's up here, so apologies, okay? Lord Palmerston is interesting. Oh, isn't he just? He appeared in my first Opium War video, and he's going to appear in my Storming of the Taku Forts when I get it out later today as well, okay? And of course, he coined the phrase gunboat diplomacy. Well, he didn't actually say gunboat diplomacy, but he talked about sending gunboats, and that's where the gunboat diplomacy thing came from, Lord Palmerston. There's no H in Ull. Thank you. Right. Lionheart. Well, very greetings to you, mate. First time you caught it live, so I hope you enjoy it. So there you go. A big shout out as well, as I always do, to my members in particular. I know Darren and Dalton are here today, so thank you very much indeed for your support. Jen Ingle, of course, you are a patron as well, so thank you very much. And recently had a few more patrons join, and that's always that's nice to have that community. And this is a great community too. So thank you very much to all of you. So as a quick intro, this is a relaxed look at British history. So it's not all the images and the lovely scripts and the audio that I have in my normal weekly videos. Okay, and it's a bit of a chat. And I always envisage this as being a bit like, sitting around a pub table, around a campfire, however you want to put it, Costa coffee. And we're just actually being able to sort of, shoot the breeze, talk a bit of history. And really what I do is I give a framework to it around what's happened in British history this week. Okay, or going back in history this week. So let me start it off with that one then. On the 25th of February, which was Sunday just gone, 25th of February, 1308, Edward II is crowned King of England. He was the son of Edward I, one of the great sort of warrior Plantagenet kings. Edward I was the man who conquered North Wales, or finished off the conquest of North Wales. He also invaded Scotland. He was sort of the nemesis of William Wallace, later called Braveheart, as portrayed by Mel Gibson in that highly historically accurate film, Braveheart. Edward II was the complete opposite of his father. He liked the arts. By all accounts, he was probably gay, or certainly bisexual, and he definitely was not a warrior like Edward I. And yes, the three things that Edward II was really, I suppose, famous for was, first and foremost, he was the very first non-Welsh Prince of Wales. His father created him Prince of Wales after he'd conquered North Wales, and almost as a bit of a two fingers to the Welsh. He said that, as he couldn't understand the Welsh language, he said that the Welsh could have a king who he couldn't understand. Could have a prince who he couldn't understand, and so he offered up his baby son, who obviously was still speaking Gaga at the time. And Edward II is officially the first ever non-Welsh Prince of Wales. He also led the British. He was the English at the Battle of Bannockburn, the great victory for the Scots over the English. And he was personally there. In fact, actually, he had to get rushed off the field. There was a good chance he was going to get captured, which, based on his reign of 20-year reign, actually, as King of England, probably wouldn't have been a bad thing if he'd been captured. And of course, finally, he was usurped. He was put in prison at Berkeley Castle in Gloucestershire, where legend has it he died with a red hot poker stuck up his bottom. And no one actually knows if that's really true, but that's the legend, and it is quite a grisly way to go, isn't it? So there you go. Longshanks Lionheart is saying Longshanks, one of my favorites. Longshanks was the nickname of Edward I, mainly because he had very long legs. And he's and we've still got a blinking debate going on about how you pronounce Hull. I'm not going there anymore, all right? So anyway, that's Edward II kicking us off for events that happened in British history this week. Another event that happened in British history, much more recent, 2023, 1st of March 2023, I moved to Worcester from Cheshire. So I've been down here a year now. Great city, loving it. Obviously moved down for Lady Love. And you hear me refer to Sarah every now and then. So yeah, she lives down here. We don't live together. Well, that's a bit too much information, isn't it? But anyway, Sarah and I now living in Worcester, a great city, real historic city as well. Lots obviously was a Roman city initially, a Roman fort here. That's hence the Kester bit at the end of Worcester. Amazing place. Worcester Cathedral, of course, has the tomb of King John. Another, we've just talked about Edward II, rubbish king. King John, another one. Obviously, the brother of Richard the Lionheart. So Lionheart, you'll like that one. Again, not a patch on his brother. Really made famous in Robin Hood stories, although the original ballads of Robin Hood never mentioned King John. That was only sort of later on in the film industry that King John. And Robin Hood. Speaking of which, another great film. We talked about Braveheart just now. Kevin Costner's Robin Hood. He was crap as Robin Hood, let's be honest. But Alan Rickman, pantomime villain as the sheriff of Nottingham, absolutely superb. Personally, like the Russell Crowe version of Robin Hood as well. Plays fast and loose with history. But there you go, don't they all? So there you go. Worcester, great place. And actually, I've done a couple of videos regarding Worcester since I've been here. For Woodbine Willie, the army chaplain in the First World War, who used to preach whilst handing out packets of fags, cigarettes to the troops, came back, died. He actually managed to survive the war, was awarded the Military Cross. When he died in Worcester, his funeral took place in the city. He's buried in St. John's Cemetery on the other side of the river. And his funeral cortege, when it passed through the city in the 1920s, people threw packets of Woodbine cigarettes onto it, which I think is quite cool. The other story I did tell was of Hannah Snell, the female warrior, the 18th century female warrior of England. She was this woman, lived down near the commandery in central Worcester now. And her husband joined the army, cleared off, left her with children. And she basically joined the army to try and find him. She dressed up as a bloke. And she never did find him, but she stayed in the army and actually saw active service in India. In the 18th century, she fought at one of the battles where a young Robert Clive was present, and she was injured. She got a musket ball in her thigh, which she was going to get taken to the surgeon, as you would. And of course, once he'd whipped her trousers off, her breeches off, he'd have found out that the secret would have been out. So she actually found a local Indian woman, and together she basically did a DIY operation, found the musket ball herself and pulled it out. So she was a bit of a character. So if you haven't seen Hannah Snell or Woodbine Willie's videos, go and have a look at those. Hannah Snell wasn't one of my big hit ones, but I thought it was a great story. And ultimately, she exposed herself. that's the wrong word. It's a Friday, folks, but that's the wrong word. But she came out. She actually told her when they all got moved back to London, they were in a tavern, and she basically told her male colleagues, by the way, I've got a bit of a secret to let you into. You know, I'm not a man. And she actually ended up getting a army pension. She wasn't at the Chelsea barracks, the Chelsea pensioner, but she was given a pension from the army by the Duke of York, even though she was a woman, because she had served. Interesting story. A bit of female rights 250 odd years ago. Right, let's crack on though. So let me just see what's going on in the chat. Sorry, folks. Longshank's one of my favourite medieval kings. If you can have a favourite. Interesting one, actually. That's a good one, Lionheart. Go on, folks. Who's your favourite medieval king? And I think you're right. I mean, I think cross any of the medieval kings, and I think you did it at your peril, in fairness, Lionheart. But yeah, more like Dumbleheart. Yet another history by Mel Gibson. Ridiculous, to say the least. I'm waiting for the day that Mel Gibson does a historically accurate film. Doubt it's ever going to happen, but there you go. Dara has said, "Hi, Chris. An idea for a video might be the response of the British government to the April uprising in Bulgaria. Gladstone condemned the Ottoman response to the uprising and ultimately helped redraw the helped draw the Bulgarian border, which survives to this day. Yeah, the Bulgarian atrocities was one of those things, yeah, Britain certainly had comments, and it was one of those strange ones that the British had a real love-hate relationship with the Ottoman Empire. They saw the Ottomans; they didn't particularly support the Ottomans. Certainly, people like Gladstone supported freedom in the Balkans, in Eastern Europe. Problem was, they saw the Ottoman Empire as a bulwark against Russian expansionism. So it was almost, it happens to this day, doesn't it? That you have allies who you probably don't want to have as your ally. And I won't mention any names, but there are certain countries in the Middle East. You probably look at them and think, how on earth are you our ally? But we need you to stop our enemies. And that's always been the case. All right, where are we at? Rickman was a brilliant actor, an outrageous screen villain. It says Uncle Heavy. Yes, and you know what? I don't want to spoiler alert. Okay, he gets a mention in my Taku Forts videos, and I better just say, actually, while we're on this, some of you'll know I'm doing this week's story is the storming of the Taku Forts in the Second Opium War. But I've actually, some of you were on a live call. I did a spontaneous, impromptu live call yesterday afternoon just to litmus test. Should I, basically, my material covers 50 minutes, 50. And I really want to know, should I go for one really long video or two sort of shorter videos? And I think Sarah Jane says, I bet, I seem to remember Sarah Jane said, why on earth did I ask that question? Because it divided straight down the line. So I'm actually going to break it into two parts. First is going to come out this afternoon, later on this afternoon. So watch this space, but it's coming up. And any of you who haven't subscribed to my channel, please subscribe. And by the way, hit the little bell icon when you do it, because that will actually alert you to the fact I've released a new video. So part one's this afternoon, and that really covers how the Second Opium War started, an audacious plot to poison all the British in Hong Kong. Another little bit of history we don't cover very often, and also a British military disaster, one of their worst disasters in the Victorian and the 19th century period. And then part two is going to be the successful storming of the Taku Forts and the capture by the British and their French allies of Peking, Beijing, and the fallout from that. And I talk about some of the characters and what happened to them. And bizarrely, Alan Rickman does get a nod, not because he was in the Taku Forts or in the Second Opium War, but he's buried at Kensal Green Cemetery in London, or his ashes are. And that is where several of the people that I talk about in this two-parter about the storming of the Taku Forts end up in the Kensal Green Cemetery in London. Britain doesn't have a real national, like an Arlington cemetery, but a couple of the cemeteries in London, the big Victorian cemeteries, including Kensal Green, really are almost like heroes' acres. And in Kensal Green, Isambard Kingdom Brunel is buried there. Thomas Makepeace Thackeray is buried there. We've got Alan Rickman. Well, Gary Rhodes as well, celebrity chef, a recent one as well. So anyway, Kensal Green is one of the. I'd like to go and visit some of the graveyards in London. It sounds a bit macabre, but I just think there's some great stories to be had in those cemeteries. So there you go. David from Koshu, I appreciate that you even look at these events without taking side and looking at events in context. One of the things that's quite funny, actually, I do try and go down the middle. And the only problem with going down the middle is you always tick people off either side, don't you? So I get some people saying, oh, it's like an apologist for the British Empire. And then I get people from the other wing saying, how dare you basically say the British, were peddling opium in China. Or that the Indians might have had a right to self-government, or that maybe I noticed we've got Devet Martins here. With the Boers, maybe the British shouldn't have been invading the Boer republics. And so I've got both sides. But thank you very much for that comment. I do try and come down the middle. And what I really hope by telling my stories is you make your own decisions. Were the British good? Were the British bad? Were the people they're opposing good or bad? And maybe ask yourself sometimes a moral question. What would you have done if you were there as a Brit or as anyone else? What would you have done? But there you go. Right. Joseph Hack, hello from Florida, loud and clear, sir. Thank you very much indeed. Sarah Jane, you're innocent. I'm sure there were several of you who voted both ways yesterday, by the way. Like, I like either way you do it, Chris, which was really helpful. Anyway, keep your eyes peeled for Taku thoughts, okay? Back to British history. What happened this week in British history? 26th of February, 1839, the first ever running of the Grand National steeplechase race, one of the great horse racing events in the British horse racing calendar. Sorry, I was just reading Uncle Heavy's comment, beg your pardon, folks. So the first race just outside Liverpool, 1839, 17 runners jumping over, the original words was steeplechase, but they weren't riding from steeple to steeple, but they were jumping over stuff. The 17 runners took obstacles, including a ploughed field. Imagine trying to gallop through a ploughed field. And also amongst the fences was a stone wall. Okay, so yet to no prisoners taken if your horse hits that. Ironically won, or maybe appropriately won, for a race where, if any of you who watch the Grand National, actually everyone's potentially a winner, aren't they? Your horse falls and the 200 to 1 horse comes past them. And the very first running of the Grand National was won, appropriately enough, by a horse called Lottery. I kid you not. Also, actually, interestingly, the first faller at the very first fence in the very first Grand National was a jockey by the name of Captain Martin Beecher. And now the very first fence at the Grand National is named after him, Beecher's Brook. So there you go. So this year, the Grand National is running on the Saturday, the 13th of April. So if you like horse racing, some people who like horse racing don't like the jumps, because obviously horses are more likely to get injured with jumps. Great atmosphere at the Grand National, I have to say. Although, quite frankly, a lot of the people when I've been there, half of them, especially in the Irish beer tent, probably haven't got a clue that the race has even started. But the roar when the race does start is unbelievable. So yeah, an experience, a bucket list experience, if anyone has never been there before. Lionheart, I'm pretty sure Charles II held horse racing at Newmarket. He did indeed. He basically was the man who put Newmarket racing on the map. And interestingly, the only British monarch ever to have won a competitive horse race. He was over 6 foot. He definitely was not built like Frankie Dettori. And, you always wonder, don't you, how does this 6 foot giant win a horse race? And you do wonder whether all the other riders were just reining up slightly so the king could ride past and win. But there you go. Another little tidbit from British history. I'm full of them. And by the time you come away from this today, you too can go into the weekend with a whole lot of little pieces of history that you can either wow your friends and family with, or they'll just think you're a sad history geek. I don't know which it is. History buff. Yeah, it should be quite sad. History buffs. We're not history geeks, are we? But there you go. John, who was the winner of what else? I'm assuming you're talking about Lottery winning that very first Grand National. Can't remember what the odds were. I have read them somewhere, but I really can't remember. Anyway, let's crack on, okay? 26th, the same day, 26th of February, 1852, the sinking of HMS Birkenhead off the coast of South Africa. It was a paddle steamer left Cape Town on the 24th of February, heading for Port Elizabeth. It was carrying mainly troops for there were some civilians on board, but principally troops from the 74th Regiment of Foot, the Highland Regiment of Foot, which later became the Highland Light Infantry. And it was carrying them to the 8th Quasar War, which was being fought. As you can tell, there have been 8 of them. I think we end up with 9. Stand to be corrected. 9. Anyone else knows better than me? But so the British had ongoing wars with the Quasar tribe, which are actually Nelson Mandela's tribe, in the eastern side of South Africa, near Port Elizabeth. And of course, the last big war with the Quasars was Lord Chelmsford. He of Zulu war fame. And actually, it was his experience of and he was with the 24th Regiment of Foot there. And it was his experiences in the Causa War, where the Causas really played a real sort of hit and run tactics. They didn't do they learnt their lesson a long time ago. Mass attacks against British guns didn't really work well for the Causas, so they believed in guerrilla warfare. And of course, Chelmsford was absolutely experienced that himself, and that was his big fear in Zululand, that the Zulus would do the same. And so that's part of the reason that he was so keen and so desperate to leave the camp at Isandlwana and go chasing off towards what he thought was a Zulu army, dividing his force in the middle of Zululand, because he actually believed that they might be like the Causas, and if we don't catch them in the open on this occasion, we might never get another opportunity. So Lord Chelmsford, he gets a lot of flack for what happened afterwards, because of what we know, what happened at Isandlwana. But there's actually some rationale in his thinking. Got it wrong, but hey, there are quite a few times that we all get things wrong in our lives, but we had rationale for our decisions too, didn't we? Just not as costly normally as over 1,500 of your army being wiped out. Anyway, back to HMS Birkenhead. So HMS Birkenhead on its way to Port Elizabeth from Cape Town, 2 days out, about 100 miles from Cape Town. It hit a rock in the nighttime, and the ship started to sink. Mad panic, mainly led by the captain of the ship, trying to get the lifeboats, of which there were not enough, but get the lifeboats into the water. And the crew were basically about to jump in the lifeboats, and left the commander of the 74th Regiment of Foot, Lieutenant Colonel Seaton, drew his sword, called his men up, made them all line up on the boat. By then, some of the men, his men, were panicking as well. Drew his sword, told the men to stand to attention on parade on the deck of a sinking ship. Held his sword to the captain and basically told him to stand back from the lifeboats, and basically said that the 8 women and 13 children, women and children, will get in the boats first, which they did. And they pulled away from the ship. It took 25 minutes for HMS Birkenhead to sink, and the men of the 74th Regiment of Foot stood on parade duty as the boat started to sink, as the water came up over their knees, and only then did they try and make a swim for the coast. 444 of the 643 people on HMS Birkenhead perished. Many drowned. Others were attacked by great white sharks, and some of the horses were definitely attacked by great white sharks. So the horses were swimming for the shore, were attacked by great white sharks. And to this day, in that part of South Africa, great whites are often referred to as Tommy sharks because of attacking those British soldiers from the 74th Regiment of Foot. The next morning, 50 survivors were found clinging to the mast that was still sticking out of the water. And to this day, the Birkenhead drill is women and children first, and that's what it's actually known officially as the Birkenhead drill. So a sad moment is, but from both British and South African history, but has an impact still to this day in maritime affairs and maritime safety. And whenever there's a maritime disaster, and we find that maybe crew, and there was an occasion, wasn't it? Was it the Costa? There was a ship that went aground, started sinking off Italy, not that a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, and there was consternation because the captain basically was, got himself in a lifeboat before most of the passengers, and there's this real thing: women and children first, a la the Titanic, of course, as well. 74th Regiment of not so many foot, sadly. You're absolutely Costa Concordia, Terry. That's the one. Thank you very much indeed. And that was the more recent one, obviously not the Titanic. Got another maritime story coming up for you in a little while. Thank you very much indeed, Martin. You chimed in as well. Thank you. And that's what I like about these conversations, isn't it? Just as I say, just a shame we're not all sitting together, properly sitting together, because can you imagine where our debates would go? It would be mad. Thank you. Just reading. Chelmsford and Custer made the same mistakes. Yes, they did, Leslie. There's a really good book about Chelmsford that was John Labanda has recently made. John Labanda. And but one thing that I would suggest about Chelmsford, rather than Custer, is Chelmsford was no vainglory. And Custer probably was. Custer was on a massive ego trip, and Chelmsford wasn't. And Chelmsford, had a stellar military career. There was always a feeling a little bit with Custer that he'd been slightly over promoted and was always like a disaster waiting to happen. That's my take of Custer and what I've read about him. Chelmsford was never seen like that. He was seen as a very steady pair of hands, and indeed, logistically, a really good. He'd excelled in the British Abyssinian or Ethiopian campaign in the 1860s under Sir Robert Napier, who again appears, by the way, in part 2 of my Taku Forts videos that I'll be bringing out for you in the next few days. There you go. Right. So where we at? We've done the Birkenhead drill. By the way, some of you have been asking, and a couple of you put on here, give us a like and all this sort of thing, which is cool. I've got 2 YouTube coaches at the minute. I've got a separate YouTube coach, and I've actually got someone provided by YouTube as well, because I'm seen as a creator who's trying hard out there on YouTube, and anyway, so I'm starting to learn a little bit more about YouTube. And one of the things is that YouTube like videos that get lots of thumbs up. So please do, whichever way around. Okay, they like comments. So by all means, chuck comments in. They also like shares, and there's a little icon underneath the videos. I can see one here, which has got share. And if you've got friends, family who you think some of my videos will appeal to, then hit the share icon as well, so that people can, so that your friends can see them, and YouTube think that's good. So there you go, and that all helps with YouTube. So thank you very much. Let's crack on. I'm conscious of time, and we've got a fair bit on here. Let me just cover 3 very quick ones at a gallop, okay? Because then I want to hit three decent ones at the end. So, 27th of February, 1900. Bit of let's go. 27th of February, 1900. The Labour Representation Committee is formed, aka the Labour Party. It was formed at the Congregational Hall in Farringdon Road in London. And it was a coming together of the what was called the Independent Labour Party, the Fabians, the Social Democratic Federation, and a variety of trade unions. And as I say, on the 27th of February 1900, the Labour Representation Committee, Labour Party, was formed in Great Britain. That year, in the 1900 general election, they put up several candidates. 2 were actually elected to Parliament at the first, so within months, they'd managed to get 2 members of Parliament elected, including Keir Hardie. So there you go. Bit of politics for you. Someone was asking about politics earlier. There's a bit for you. I find the Victorian period fascinating. Some really interesting people in the Victorian period. So, 27th of February as well, going back a few years back in the Victorian period, 27th of February 1881, the Battle of Majuba in South Africa. This was during the First Boer War, Anglo-Boer War, where the, long story short, Boer republics had been established. The Boers had trekked out of the British colony of Cape Colony in the 1830s, including a very young Paul Kruger. He was under 10 at the time, I seem to think, although someone might correct me. Anyway, they established their own independent republics of the Orange Free State and the Transvaal, also known as the South African Republic. And by the 1870s, for a variety of reasons, they agreed to the British taking them over. A lot to do with economics. The Transvaal was certainly broke at the time. Also some things to do with a threat from the Zulus, and maybe the British could protect them from the Zulus. So there was a lot of skullduggery, and the British were desperate to get the Boer republics as part of a South African confederation. This was Sir Bartle Frere's great idea that South Africa could become a bit like Canada. So, and Canada just become a federation in the previous decade. So this was the great new imperial idea the British had, or certain British imperialists had. Anyway, cut a long story short, the Boers realised that actually their grass wasn't greener on the other side, and British rule wasn't quite as dandy as they thought it were. They rose in rebellion, and this was the First Anglo-Boer War. So this was a war of independence, really, from the Boers. A British army was sent from the Natal to go into Transvaal to defeat them. And at the Battle of Majuba, it was the British who were defeated. The British were under General Coley, who was part of Garnet Wolseley's Ashanti Ring, and he had 650 men. They stormed. They took over this hilltop, Majuba, and were basically they didn't fortify it enough. And the Boers had an audacious plan. They actually stormed the hill themselves, and the British were caught sitting there on their red coats in Africa, as the grass was dry and stood out like a sore thumb. And something like half of Coley's force were killed, wounded, or captured by the Boers. These irregular farmers, highly embarrassing for the British. Coley himself was shot and killed at Majuba. So, interestingly, still in South Africa, the same date, 27th of February, 1900, the Second Anglo-Boer War, and the Battle of Paardeberg. And it was on this date. The Battle of Paardeberg was when the British were finally trying to move to relieve the siege of Kimberley. And General Piet Cronje had a Boer force of over 4,000 on the banks of I think it was the Modder River. But at Paardeberg, he surrendered. He was basically surrounded by the British. On the anniversary of Majuba, which the British thought was really cool. Actually, the British had, it was the first major British victory over the Boers on that Second Boer War. Okay, so General Lord Roberts of Kandahar, interestingly, Roberts had turned up late on in the battle, and his command initially had been with his subordinate, General Kitchener, fresh from his victories at Omdurman. And Kitchener, there was a general on the ground who had prepared a battle plan. Kitchener basically dismissed it, basically wanted full frontal assault. It was very costly. Remembering that Piet Cronje surrendered with 4,000 Boers. British casualties to obtain those 4,000 Boers were nearly 1,000 men dead or wounded, and a large part of that lay at the feet of Herbert Kitchener. And obviously, Kitchener is highly controversial. He's highly controversial in South Africa, with not least because of the concentration camps, but highly controversial at Omdurman as well. Winston Churchill, not exactly a lily-livered liberal, basically criticised him for not tending the Dervish wounded, and for the desecration of the Mahdi's tomb in Omdurman. So a man who was seen, and he was called the Sudan machine. He knew what he wanted. He knew how to get victory, and victory at all costs. I think if he was a football manager, he would have employed probably every trick in the book to win a game, because winning the game or winning the trophy was far more important than the manner of winning, than the manner you did it. And there he was at Paardeberg with high casualty rate, and that wouldn't be the first time, of course, that he didn't look after his British soldiers particularly brilliantly either. So Uncle Heavy, the Boers, I'm sure we've got Hammer Down Under, northwest Australia. There's a place called Kimberley because diamonds were found there, named after the South African area. Yeah, the siege of Kimberley is fascinating because actually the siege of Kimberley, just going off on a tangent, Cecil Rhodes, great imperialist, diamond magnate, also had significant interests in the gold mines in Johannesburg, in the Boer Republic of Transvaal. But Cecil Rhodes was almost, in South African terms, he was a bit like an Elon Musk, okay? And he was in Kimberley during the siege and basically kept trying to interfere with the military commander. It must have been an absolute pain in the backside, quite frankly, to be the pain. And they didn't quite come to blows, but they came to a lot of verbal blows. And interestingly, Rhodes, in a bit of spite, actually made sure that the commander in Kimberley didn't have another significant command during the Boer War. Rhodes, I'm going to do a video about Rhodes at some stage because he is a fascinating character. And he's one of those characters you either think is fantastic or you absolutely think is outrageous. And people did at the time. When he got his honorary degree at Oxford University, there were people actually shouting out at the graduation ceremony against what he was doing in Africa. And this is in Victorian Britain in the 1890s. So, controversial man even in his day, rather like Clive of India. But that's another story, isn't it? Right. Darren Marsh is saying definitely need a video on roads. Can you imagine? That's going to go down. Um, so, and hello, Jeff Smith from Rhode Island in the USA. Thank you very much indeed. So we've got Majuba, Paardeberg, and all on the 27th, and the formation of the Labour Party in Britain. Right, let's crack on to the 29th of February. Oh my lord, I've forgotten the beginning date. Let me just get myself right here. 29th of February 1884. The Battle of El Teb in Sudan. This was, I've done a video about the Battle of El Teb, so have a look out for it. British victory in the Sudan. This was on the eastern coast, the Red Sea coast of Sudan. It was sort of a sideshow in many respects to the attempts to rescue Gordon in Khartoum. It was led, and of course the attempt to rescue Gordon in Khartoum was led by General Garnet Wolseley. Over on the Red Sea coast, there was an expedition that was led by General Gerald Graham. It was sort of a bit of a, as much as anything, it was sort of a PR exercise and to put a bit of pressure on the Mahdi, but not an attempt to rescue Gordon. And it's a PR exercise really for the Egyptians, because Sudan was actually technically an Egyptian colony, not a British colony. And it was really saying to the Egyptians, oh yeah, we're going to support you. The British, William Gladstone, Prime Minister, really didn't care about the Egyptian Empire in Sudan, certainly didn't want a British Empire in Sudan, but he was mindful that the British had a very vested interest in the Suez Canal in Egypt. And only a few years ago, before, there'd been a nationalist rising in Egypt, which had been put down by Sir Garnet Wolseley. And the British really wanted to make sure that the Egyptian government was stable. And part of the stability was to basically show that we are supporting you down there in the Sudan. And we'll try and rescue a couple of your garrisons on the Red Sea coast. And we'll send General Gerald Graham, VC, with his troops of both Indian and British and Indian troops there to try and rescue them. And hopefully as well, it will pull off some of the Mahdi's forces and make the Mahdi divide his forces so that they're not all attacking Gordon in Khartoum. Sort of, that's the long and short. And basically, the Battle of El Teb, 4,500 British against 10,000 Mahdists under the command of Osman Digna. And the Mahdists made him from the Beja tribe with this incredible hairstyle, which gave them the nickname from the British soldiers of Fuzzy Wuzzies. And that was a very specific term to the Bejas. It wasn't a general thing to anyone else from Africa or from the Caribbean. British soldiers, when they talked about the Fuzzy Wuzzies, they knew exactly who they were talking about, the Beja tribes. Beja tribesmen put up an incredible fight against the British, incredible bravery at both the Battle of El Teb and the Battle of Tamai. British were victorious, but they knew they'd been in a fight. And yeah, El Teb, as I say, have a look. Very interesting as well. Victoria Cross was won by a Royal Naval officer, Captain Arthur Wilson, which is interesting because it only occurred to me as I was making the notes for this, actually. Of course, Dad's Army, we have Sergeant Arthur Wilson. So it's an interesting one. I don't think there was any reason the same names, just lady luck. But interesting, VC was awarded to Captain Arthur Wilson, who defended a gun that was being overrun by the Dervish. I mean, the Dervish forces, or the Beja warriors, actually managed to get to the guns, and he stood there defending the guns until relieved by some infantry. And General Graham appears actually in a previous life in the Taku Forts. He's going to appear in the Taku Forts video. And actually, interesting, in the Taku Forts video, there's all sorts of characters from loads of my different videos, okay, make appearances. So at the Taku Forts, so in the 2 episodes that I'm going to do for you, Garnet Wolseley's there. Charles Gordon, the future General Charles Gordon of Khartoum, he's there. Edward Seymour, by the way, who led the failed relief expedition to try and relieve the Peking legations during the Boxer Rising in 1900. As in the film 55 Days at Peking, Admiral Edward Seymour, he's there as well. Fascinating. And there's some loads of other incredible stories coming out of the Taku Forts, including 7 Victoria Crosses awarded at the 3rd storming of the Taku Forts. The forts were fought over them 3 times in this war. But the 3rd final one, 7 Victoria Crosses awarded, including to the youngest ever recipient, 15-year-old. It actually stood, by the way, as the most Victoria Crosses awarded for one single action at the time in the British Army. It was to be It was to be overhauled 19 years later at the Battle of Rorke's Drift. But for 19 years, the Taku fought 7 Victoria Crosses, with the most Victoria Crosses ever awarded in one single action in the British Army until Rorke's Drift. So great, some really, really good stories coming up. As I say, it's not all about the Brits winning, by the way. Heads up here. Before that successful storming, the British had suffered one of their worst ever defeats at their second attempt to win to storm the Taku forts. Absolute disaster. It was almost like a Dunkirk moment. The British were evacuated. They had to stand whilst being fired at by the Chinese. They were evacuated. They lined up in the water up to their necks, waiting for rowing boats to come and relieve them. It's almost like a little Dunkirk moment in China. One of those men being evacuated was a young midshipman, 18-year-old midshipman called John Fisher, later known as Admiral Jackie Fisher, Admiral of the Fleet Jackie Fisher, who built up the Royal Navy before the First World War and was heavily involved and supportive of the Dreadnought campaign, or Dreadnought expenditure and development of the Dreadnought battleships. So there you go. That's all coming up for you. I suppose when I get my finger out, finish doing this live, I'll get that one sorted. It's all ready to go. Just need to put the images on. So that's part 1's coming out today. Part 2, hopefully over the weekend, might be Monday. Just watch this space. As I say, if you haven't already, make sure you do subscribe to the channel. I guess most of you have, otherwise you wouldn't be sitting here after 45 minutes talking to me with this one. So, the other thing I did want to ask about, actually, books. I'm funny enough, I'm doing a piece. This is a little heads up again, another heads up for you. I am going to be doing a piece of work with Chris Parkinson, Redcoat Military History. We're going to do a joint video. Okay, it's actually going to be, we're going to look at 4 films from Victorian British Victorian military campaigns in 4 films. We're going to look and review how do they really compare to the history. So I think we've now agreed that Chris is going to, as I say, we're going to be together. Chris is going to look at the Shangani Patrol and Zulu Dawn, and I'm going to be dealing with the 4 Feathers and 55 Days at Peking. How about that? So anyway, Chris was saying to me, he says, Chris, because he's written a couple of books in the past, and he says, I'm surprised you've never written a book. And I said, I haven't got really the time. And he said, but the amount of blinking information and videos you've done about the British in Sudan, there is a book there waiting. And I thought, isn't that cool? So I'm seriously thinking about putting a book together, so drawing on everything I've done from YouTube, building on it a bit more. But I'd like to know from folk here, if I did something like that, if I did a book on YouTube, not holding you to anything, if I did a book on the British wars in Sudan in the 1880s, 1890s, would you be interested? Would you even contemplate buying a copy? Don't know what the price, it won't be that expensive, but would you be interested? Or am I just on some fantasy ego trip? And quite frankly, don't bother with it, Chris, not interested. But if you're interested, it could be something I'd do. It'd be really cool to do one like that. And I'm also thinking, by the way, of doing something a little bit like what we do here, but a book which is 365 days, every day a history day, and I'll just tell one story from each day in British history, through the calendar year. But most importantly, just tell me if you think that maybe something about the Sudan war will be quite cool. Don't know. So let me just have a quick look back up here where we're at. Oh, we're getting lots of those, but let me just sing. Don Gardner does point out that Winston was a liberal in his early days, very much around free trade, rather than maybe the Liberal Democrats that we talk about today, Don. But you're absolutely right on that. Have I considered a video on the origin of the phrase "let's crack on" for being one of the most British phrases? I haven't specifically that one, although I have got a couple up my sleeve. I would like to talk about some phrases. Son of a gun. I mean, there's a lot of military stuff in there. Son of a gun, freezing the balls off a brass monkey, cold enough to freeze the balls off a brass monkey. We've got a fair few like that. I'd love to have that one. And I'd also like to do one about British pub names as well. I think that'd be quite fun. But there you go. So Corporal Jones gets the catchphrase. Thank you very much. We've got a few more. You'd be interested. Oh yeah, we've got a fair few. That's cool. Yes, the expensive hardcover copy, Darren. I mean, one of the great things with publishing nowadays is, of course, you can go to publishers, and I have published a book in the past actually, but it was about public speaking. So if you were to go onto Amazon, you could probably still find it. It's called Nail That Presentation. Woohoo! What a title, eh? But the other things you can do, of course, is do self-publishing as well. So who knows? So Darren, it may or may not be a hardcover, but it'd be quite cool to do a book actually. A friend of mine, Dean Allen, down in South Africa, has published one. It does very well. All about cricket in the British Empire, or in Southern Africa in particular. So there you go. Book's a great idea. Pub names would be fun. Thank you very much, David. For a book, try some type of crowdfunding. Easiest way to see if people want it. That's a good idea, Lance. That's a really good idea. Thank you very much for that one. Not thought of that at all. Appreciate that. Thank you. An ebook, Terry Murphy. I think there would be an ebook. I mean, I think there's if I produce a book, there'll be a Kindle version. I mean, I got a Kindle for Christmas, and I have to say it's great. I've just been reading The River War by Winston Churchill, all about Sudan. Strangely enough, in that I also have Audible on the go, so when I'm driving, I can listen to books there. Finally finished actually in Audible, William Dalrymple's The Anarchy, which was the history of the East India Company. Fascinating, very detailed. I don't know if anyone's read The Anarchy. Really good book. And of course, the East India Company. I'd love to do a piece on the East India Company, because most of us don't know much about the East India Company, bar they were in India. They were fighting a lot in India. I mean, ask most Brits, what do they know about the East India Company? And that's your lot. But about Clive of India, probably. And not a lot else. One of my friends, Sarah, up in Cheshire, she said, didn't they try and brand Jack Sparrow as a pirate in Pirates of the Caribbean? Some of my American friends will know that the East India Company had a lot to do with tea being shipped to America and the Boston Tea Party. They're involved with China, not directly, but involved with China with regard to the opium trade. They were fascinating. They had coaling stations around the world, in places like St. Helena in the Atlantic was one of theirs. It wasn't a British colony; it was an East India Company thing, and a fascinating history that you ended up with this joint stock company actually having its own empire and ruling more people than the British government did at one stage. Fascinating. Its own army, bigger than the British army. Its own navy. A navy as well as a merchant fleet. Fascinating company, the East India Company. But anyway, William Dalrymple's book, really, really interesting. Say very detailed, but very interesting as well. Gives us, I mean, Dalrymple lives in India, pretty pro-Indian. He's definitely not a sort of an apologist for the British Empire. Far from it. And oh, thank you, Uncle Heavy. Dalrymple is not a popular name in parts of Scotland to this day, but nothing to do with William and his book. But yeah, the Dalrymple family comes from a family with more pedigree than Chris Green does, that's for sure. But interesting, by the way, East India Company. One of my family, or we married into, was the Huggins family, who famously were the painters. Painted a lot of the boats. I mean, actually did paintings of boats for the East India Company. Used to keep a record of their ships, because of course you couldn't go around, you couldn't have a photo catalogue of all your ships. So William Huggins, used to paint them. And he's got paintings in the National Maritime Museum and things like that. But he's not a blood relative. We married into the Huggins family. But anyway, there you go. Bit of a claim to fame, not much. Also, we were going to marry into Steward on the Titanic as well, but he didn't come back. So my great aunt Sarah never married her fiance. Kept her wedding dress in a loft, in a trunk in the loft. Never married, wore black for the rest of her life. Died in the 1960s, as my grandmother called her, a miserable old cow. And when you're in your 80s, my grandma can say things like that, can't she, and get away with it. But there you go. So now that's complete. We're off on one there. So let me finish actually with today with a one for today, the 1st of March, and it's maritime. Seeing as we've just been talking about the Titanic and the Huggins painting all the East India Company ships. 1st of March, 1854, the SS City of Glasgow leaves Liverpool en route to Philadelphia and is never seen again. It was a passenger ship. It had been launched in 1850. It had been built in Glasgow, hence the name, City of Glasgow. It had been across the Atlantic for the previous 4 years. It was a regular run. It actually moved from Glasgow to Liverpool, been bought by a Liverpool firm, so Liverpool became its home port, and it left Glasgow, as I say, on the 1st of March 1854, carrying 480 passengers. It was a reasonably big boat. It was about 230 feet long, which makes it sort of a little bit smaller than the Great Britain, SS Great Britain. Those of you who've been to Bristol and seen Brunel's ship, SS Great Britain. SS Great Britain's about 300 feet. So slightly smaller, a lot smaller than Titanic. Titanic was top end of the 800s. But we're talking a significant steamer. Left under its captain was, if I can get his name, Captain Morrison. It was his first time he'd ever commanded the City of Glasgow. But he'd been a senior officer on the City of Glasgow, so he knew the ship well. Left on Liverpool on the 1st of March and was never seen again. The sister ship, the SS City of Manchester, reported, it was coming the other way from America, and it reported that it had encountered quite a lot of icebergs whilst crossing the Atlantic. And so no one was too concerned when City of Glasgow didn't arrive on time in Philadelphia. It was basically like it's probably stuck in ice. It's got plenty of coal. It's got plenty of food. So actually, it's probably okay. Obviously, time passed and people started to get slightly more concerned. And at the end of May, so we're talking, where are we? 10 weeks later, it was 8 weeks later, it was finally announced that they believed that the City of Glasgow had been lost. To this day, no one ever knows what happened to it. One ship basically believed that they'd seen an upturned hull, copper hull, in the middle of the Atlantic, but no one knows what it was. A bow containing the words City of Glasgow washed up on the west coast of Scotland, which is not actually that close to the route that it was taking from Liverpool. But there was another ship called the City of Glasgow, which indeed had run into a storm off the coast of west coast of Scotland, and claimed it had lost its bow. And it seems that the bow that was found was the bow from that ship. So no one's ever. It's one of those great mysteries. 480 souls somehow went to the bottom of the Atlantic somewhere. So that's a bit of a sad one to end on today. So we've had a bit of a mixed bag, haven't we? We've had Grand Nationals, we've had a couple of Boer Wars with a bit of politics in there. Oh, by the way, this week in British history, Benjamin Disraeli became Prime Minister for the first time. Only Jewish person or person of Jewish heritage ever to be Prime Minister in Britain. By the way, as well, from the Boer War, Lady Smith was relieved in this week in British history as well. And the last one, maybe just to finish on slightly better, let's just see what people are saying. It's St. David's Day. It is indeed. And that's another talk. We talked about sayings and pub names. I would like to do a video about the patron saints of Britain, because, of course, St. David is the only one, Darren, who is actually born in the country that he's a patron saint of. St. Andrew certainly wasn't. St. George, well, he was from Turkey. He came nowhere near England ever. And even good old St. Patrick, of course, came from Wales. He was abducted by pirates just after the Romans had left Britain. And he was a Christian living in, post-Roman Britain. And he was abducted from a settlement on the coast of Wales. So there you go. So yes, happy St. David's Day to all my Welsh fans, Welsh viewers. Let's just have a look here. Oh, Christopher Warren. Chris, have you ever thought about selling mugs and T-shirts with the history chat printed on them? Funnily enough, no. But that's another great idea. Christian Parkinson does it. And Redcoat Military History, and he said it to me. Oh, you should do it. But I said, oh, yeah. So really interesting that one of my viewers, at least, might buy a T-shirt or mug with the History Chap. Might be the little History Chap logo that I've got, which Molly designed for me. She did some great work last year, redesigning giving me up some branding for the History Chap. And I really like that. Could finish on the origins of St. David's Day. Unfortunately, Darren, I don't know the origins of St. David's Day, so screwed that one. Borada. You'd buy one, Tim. Thank you very much indeed. Yucky da says hammer down. Thank you very much indeed. Oh, we're all off now. So come on. People said Uncle Heavy says it's a U-boat that took out the SS, the SS City of Glasgow, or Rogue Wave. Could have been anything, couldn't it? Oh, yeah. Who knows? Probably was some more like a rogue wave. Could have been an iceberg. Don't know, do we? Chris Manson, I'd love a History Chat mug for my brew on Fridays. Well, funny enough, through YouTube, you can buy merch, can't you? And so I need to just design the merch. So, yeah, I think I might. Another little one for me. Oh, Lord. Oh, now we're off. It's Friday. John, St. George's wife was a bit of a dragon. Anyone who has a bit of a sense of humor and wants to do the patron saints, try and look up Al Murray, the pub landlord comedian. He does one all about the 4 patron saints, not the history, but a really fun intake, not least on the final bit about the English and basically bashing a foreigner up all because of a bird. But a great one to have. By the way, comedy, I don't know if any of you know this one. Maybe this ties in with my slightly naughty sense of humor. But just prior to COVID, I actually did a stand-up comedy course in Liverpool, of all places. It was great. And the end bit, the last night, we all had to do a routine in a theatre in Liverpool in front of 100 Scousers. And I lived to tell the tale. Okay, so yeah, one of my bucket list things to actually have been on stage done a stand-up routine in front of 100 people who just happened to be Scousers. And the coach said to me, he said, Chris, he said, let's face it, everyone else was from Liverpool, everyone else was there, all the other people on the course, about 6 of us, 8 of us, I can't remember now. And he said, you're posh. He said, we're just you're gonna have to milk that. He said, Scousers will love it if you take the mickey out of middle class. So I did this whole skit all about the woes of being middle class, having to eat tapenade and ciabatta bread and go skiing and have kids at private school. And it went down an absolute storm. They did a vote at the end of the night and I beat all the Scousers. I was the most popular comedian that night. And he actually, the guy who was doing it said, would you like to come to the Chester Comedy Festival? And a week later, Britain went into lockdown. There was no Chester Comedy Festival. Don't know if it's ever come back, but there you go. That was a calling that I missed out on in my life and ended up doing the History Chap instead. Last thing for this week, just before I say goodbye to you, 1916, on the 2nd of March, 1916, conscription started in Britain for the very first time. It had actually, conscription, the Military Services Act had been passed in January 1916, because basically Britain had run out of all those volunteer soldiers, all those PALS battalions that have joined up in 1914, people like Albert Ball in my last video that I did, and they were now running short of men. And so conscription was introduced. It wasn't popular. 200,000 people attended a rally in Trafalgar Square protesting in the middle of a war. 200,000 people turned up to protest about conscription. Conscription initially, as of this date, 2nd of March 1916, was for single men between the ages of 18 and 41. Rapidly, by July, it had been extended to married men between 18 and 41. And I think later in the war, the age was raised to 51. And by the end of the First World War, 2 million people had been conscripted. Interestingly, conscription, remember the United Kingdom at that time included all of Ireland. Conscription was only on mainland Great Britain, so England, Scotland, Wales, deliberately not introduced in Ireland because they didn't know what the reaction was going to be. But many Irish nationalists were very concerned that they were going to get called up to serve in a British army, which is sort of the reason the British didn't do it in Ireland, because they thought there'd be a backlash. As there was, we had the Easter Rising in 1916, and mainly because of the way the British managed to mishandle that, there was a backlash anyway. So, arguably couldn't have got any worse, could it? But nevertheless, so there you go. Conscription was introduced. went on till 1920. They folded it, reintroduced in 1939, just prior to the Second World War starting, and of course was retained until 1960 when it was officially disbanded in Britain. There is some talk about conscription again because of potential Russian threats. Don't know if that will happen or not, but there you go. So a video about Captain Cook. I seem to remember someone mentioned this yesterday, and I will do one about Captain Cook at some stage. The British explorers, you know, they good and bad, but there are some great stories. And again, we don't know them all, do we? I mean, David Livingstone. A lot of people have asked about Livingstone. Stanley Baker, not the actor, the explorer, 19th century explorer. And don't forget, of course, Henry Morton Stanley, the man who found Livingstone in Africa. You know, Dr. Livingstone, I presume, seen as an American, and he was being paid by an American newspaper to go and find Livingstone. Obviously, he'd emigrated to America by then, but Stanley was originally born in North Wales, so he's a Welshman by birth. If not by adopted, but America was US was his adopted home. So Richard Francis Burton, was that it? Did I say? Yeah, so Richard Francis Burton. Yeah, another one of those Victorian people that would be doing. Chris, Uncle Heavy says, just how long is your videos to-do list? Let me quickly show you, and then I'm going to sign off. All right, but my to-dos list. These are all the suggestions that either thoughts I have or suggestions people give me. Some of them have been ticked. But let me just take a few from the top. Oh, look, Cecil Rhodes, he's there. The 3 father and son Victoria Cross recipients. That's there. One about Netley Hospital in the big military hospital near Southampton on the Solent, built in Victorian times. The 4th Anglo-Mysore War in India. The Battle of Fulford and Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066. I mean, these are just at the top of the list. I'm not saying these are my favourites. Anzio, I've talked about that one before. The Hunt for the Koningsberg, in and the Real African Queen. Tommy Cooper and his wartime experiences in Egypt in World War II. And that's, of course, where he got his fez. We've got... what else we've got here? Sir Richard Burton, just been mentioned there. Thank you very much indeed. Albert Jacka, Australian hero, of course. Spithead Mutiny, the Salonika Front in the First World War, the Fighting Bradford Brothers in the First World War. God blimey, William Coltman, VC, most decorated non-officer in the First World War. Interesting man. Oh, and here we've got one. The Siege of Drogheda on Oliver Cromwell. Oh, God. Oh, my God. I think I prefer to do the Indian Mutiny for my Indian fans. God, true. What else have we got? We've got the oldest Victoria Cross recipient, William Rayner, age 69. So I think just the most recent ones that have come up here. The Battle of Sluys. Was it one of you guys? Was it Darren? Did you mention that one to me? Not sure. The Battle of Eland's River, which showed Australian troops and the pedigree of Australian troops in the Boer War, 16 years before they ever won their spurs or got all their credit at Gallipoli. And someone else has asked for Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Blacker. So there we go. Loads of stuff there. Lots to do. I could either do with more hours in the day, or I need to find someone who can take some of the strain off me doing a lot of the editing, maybe some of the researching as well. And actually, joking apart, those of you who join my membership, those of you who generously support me, thank you. And I'm using that money, or starting to accumulate that money, so that I can actually invest in that sort of support, so we can make better videos, but also more of them. And I can do what I really love doing, which is telling the stories, because, you know, I'm pretty good at editing now. Not as good as Chris Parkinson, I have to say. He's really nifty at it, but I have to be honest, it's not my calling. You know, it's rather like I can paint walls and wallpaper, but I don't really want to do that either in life. So yeah, if I can put it out to a third party, I will. So thank you for your support, and for those of you who've joined me as patrons or as members of my History Chat channel. here on YouTube. Thank you very much indeed. And with that, folks, I'm going to go away and finish off the Taku Forts, or at least the Taku Forts Part 1. Remember, there's Part 2. Keep your eyes open for that. Those of you who haven't subscribed to my channel, please do, because it will remind you, it will come up at the top of your page when you're on YouTube that I've just released a new video, especially if you hit the little bell icon. So thank you very much indeed, folks. Have a brilliant weekend, whatever you do. Funny if I'm going up to see my mother in Cheshire this weekend, up in Nantwich. So that will be fun. And it's now raining again in Worcester. Very wet out there, on the ground in Worcester at the minute. You wonder why the Severn Valley gets so much flooding. I think we know why. So have a great weekend. Keep well. See you very soon. Not least, see you very soon with the first video, part 1 of the storming of the Taku Forts. All the very best. Have a lovely weekend.